This video contains or may contain spoilers for Hollow Knight. So, what is the Shade exactly? It's a part of the Knight, inherently connected to them. Being a vessel, the Knight is born of God and void, and the latter is where the Shade comes from. It has a will of its own, separate from that of the Knight. All of the implications of this make for some very interesting lore, which I will be discussing in this video. Some Hollow Knight players have mistakenly referred to the Shade as the Knight's soul. I can see how that mistake would be made, since the Shade is a ghostly-looking figure that emerges from the Knight's body when they die. But this wouldn't make sense. For one thing, how is the Knight able to live without the Shade? If the soul is a being's true self, then the body could not be animate without it. Additionally, we are given hints that spirits in the game are actually the souls of the dead, such as the dialogue from the Whispering Root in the Spirit's Glade. The Lost Kin also appears as a spirit, not a Shade, and they're a vessel just like the Knight. The Knight is still incomplete without their Shade, though. 1/3 of their soul gauge is missing, probably representing how the Knight is made of 3 things: worm, root, and void, and that void is missing. Curiously, if the Knight dies a second time before reaching and reclaiming their Shade, it seems to emerge from their body as if it had still been inside them. The Knight can't have 2 Shades, though. So the only way this would make sense is if the Shade was transported to the site of the Knight's new death from where it was before. As a part of the Knight, the Shade is essentially tied to them, so this would be plausible. Initially, the Shade floats idly wherever it is until it sees the Knight, upon which it becomes agitated and starts attacking the Knight. If it is surrounded by any other enemies, it doesn't try to attack them, probably because it doesn't see those enemies as threats. The likely reason why it attacks the Knight is because it knows that the Knight is seeking to reabsorb it into their shell, and we know from the nature of void that it does not like to be contained against its will. I still think it's a little strange that the Shade just stays still until the Knight comes back for it. You'd think it would at least wander around the room that it's in. The number of hits with the Knight's nail that is required to defeat the Shade and reabsorb it depends on the Knight's maximum amount of health when they died rather than the strength of the nail. The Dream Nail, however, will always defeat the Shade in a single hit. Since the Dream Nail is powerful enough to cut between the dream realm and the material world, one could see how it could also just as easily cut through void. The Shade can also be instantly reabsorbed if it runs into an environmental hazard such as thorns or spikes. Guess it's so concerned with not getting reabsorbed that it doesn't pay attention to anything that could make this happen other than the Knight. The Shade receives more from the Knight than just its appearance. The Knight drops their nail upon death, although they respawn with a new one, which the Shade then picks up and will use to attack the Knight. The Shade also learns the same spells as the Knight and use these to attack the Knight as well. Interestingly, even if the Knight had died and not yet reclaimed their Shade upon learning these spells, the Shade still knows them, even if the Knight has not yet used the spell while containing the Shade. This is further proof of the Shade being inherently connected to the Knight, even when outside their shell. An NPC who can sense this connection is Confessor Gigi. She's been asleep in her home in Dirtmouth for a very long time, yet she can tell exactly where in Hallownest the Knight's Shade is just by peering into them. Once she knows where the Shade is, she's even able to summon it to where she and the Knight both are. As for how Gigi can do these things, She appears to be possibly related to the snail shamans, like the living and dead ones that the knight encounters in the game and acquires spells from. We know that the shamans could manipulate the forces of both soul and void, and the snail shaman in the ancestral mound can sense when the knight has learned new spells, even if he has not seen the knight use them. In the same way that this shaman can sense what spells are inside the knight, Gigi can sense the void that was once inside the knight and call it back to them. Of course, there's one thing in the game that changes the Shade's reaction to the knight completely: the Void Heart. Acquiring this charm makes the knight truly one with the void, able to command it according to their will. The Shade, recognizing this, remains idle when the knight approaches it. It even turns the other direction to face the knight if they move. The Shade can also be reabsorbed upon one nail hit at this point. This is probably because the Shade actually wants to be one with the knight this time, since the knight now has such a complete connection with the void that the Shade naturally wishes to be a part of. Even if it didn't want that, the Shade sees the knight as a void creature just like itself, and the very Lord of Shades, which it has no reason or desire to fight back against. Another stark change happens through the Void Heart. At the end of the battle with the Radiants, at the end of the game, the knight willingly breaks their own shell to release the void inside them. The player, acting as the knight, is then able to land the finishing blows on the Radiants. But I said at the beginning of the video that the Shade is only one part of the knight, not their entire self. So how can this be possible? It seems that in this instance, the knight and their Shade have become one in a way that they never have before, fusing their wills and consciousness into a single entity. In Godhome, this being is referred to as void-given form. When the knight, as the Lord of Shades, is fully united with the void inside of them since their birth, they become powerful enough to defeat even a higher being. Of course, this is not the only way that the knight can transform into a void entity and defeat the Radiants. If the knight defeats the Absolute Radiants at the peak of the Pantheon of Hallownest, their shell once again breaks, but this time they become one not only with their own Shade, but a large amount of void. This void entity is known as Void-Given Focus, or the Shade Lord. Creatures in Godhome are at the peak of their potential power, and for the knight, that is bringing the void together and becoming one with it in a way that they never have before, so that they can defeat a higher being at her full potential power. What do you think of the lore relating to the Knight's Shade? Is there any aspect of it that I didn't mention in this video? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please give it a like if you found it interesting, and subscribe to my channel for more videos about Hollow Knight and other media. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.